You're listening to Brainwork Framework, a business and marketing podcast brought to you by focus-biz.com.
Business owners and entrepreneurs, if you could invest your money to make a return for yourself while also helping other people, how would that make you feel? With us today is Nathan Turner. He is the president of Earnest Investing LP. He runs an investment fund where he invites people to invest to purchase residential mortgages all over the US while basically making a great return while helping people stay in their homes. So excited to chat with him today. Nathan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here. This is good.
Absolutely. So excited to have you. Our first question we ask our entrepreneurs is what were you doing before that kind of led you into what you're doing today?
Life is a windy road. It's really interesting to see kind of where things take you, and as much as you should always have plans, you should be open to opportunities as well. So that my first real business was a Curves franchise. My wife and I had two locations out in Montreal, Quebec, in that area. And it just kind of morphed as time went on. Started getting into doing some fix and flip real estate. I really enjoyed doing that. And that was doing it across the country for a couple of years. And then the market changed. So I got stuck with this one property that I ended up being a landlord and figured out that I liked cash flow. I didn't like headaches that went along with owning property. So then that kind of led to what I'm doing now, where I'm buying mortgages with all that cash flow that I liked as a landlord without any of the headaches that go along with it. And well, maybe not none, but significantly fewer.
Absolutely. It's so funny because I hear this from a lot of entrepreneurs about finding opportunity. Sometimes what they were doing before, different industry, different profession, different entirely, but somehow you just see opportunity, you take advantage of it, you try to capitalize on creating value for people. And again, while reducing our headaches, our overhead. So tell me more about what the notes are, what the investing does. How does this process work? Who is it good for? I want to know all the things about this.
Yeah, sure. So mortgage note investing means that I am buying the mortgage attached to a property. So ideally, my best case scenario is that I never actually own the house, which sounds a little bit weird, but it's a great position to be in. I would rather own the loan that is attached to the house. And that gives me a lot more flexibility and less headaches. And then I have the ability to pivot if and how I need to. So for example, because that house is always the background, in case of non-payment, the house is what kind of ensures that I'm going to continue to get paid one way or another. Usually, if somebody quits paying on their mortgage, it's almost every time we can work something out. We can get together with the person living there and figure out what went wrong, how we can fix it, and how to get them back on track. It's very rare that I ever foreclose on a person. If I do a foreclosure, which I do, almost always it's on an empty property. And that's because the people either abandoned it or they passed away. Something happened where there is no one to make any payments. And in that case, then I can foreclose, take back the property, resell it, sell it on terms, create another note. And it just gives me all kinds of flexibility. So that's maybe not exactly the answer to your question, but it is a
No,
little bit of broad understanding. Maybe.
yeah, it absolutely does. So in this situation, do you, when you're like buying this loan, do you become the bank? Are you the middleman between the bank then? Or are you just like another guarantor? I guess for sure we're good for this loan or we're going to make payments towards it. And you have the house as collateral. Is that kind of how that
It's
works?
it's the first one. I become the bank. So I've taken it from the bank. Now the bank is out of the picture. I'm the new bank. Any payments that were going to the bank are now coming to me. Essentially, that's how that works.
Wow, that's incredible. Do you mind if I ask what the average rate of return on a lot of these mortgage loans are? Because I feel like they're very high, or I always felt like the interest that the bank would earn seemed to be high or very
Yes.
good return on investment. Is that true?
It is. It's one of those questions where it depends, which is the worst answer, but it really does. So, for example, what I'm buying mostly now is seller finance notes. So, what that means is somebody owned a second property, they sold it, and took back a loan to be able to finance the person that's going to be purchasing the house. They've then created a note. Typically, these seller finance notes tend to be higher interest rates. So, if the bank is lending at 6 or 7%, seller finance deal will be like 8 or 9, 10, somewhere in that range. So they already start out at a higher interest rate to begin with. For my fund, we're looking at a minimum 12% yield. So that's where I'm at. It doesn't always work out that way, of course. And sometimes you're depending on what you're looking for and how you're trying to structure yourself. You can put a 10% rate of return is not out of the question at all. I pay my investors 8 out of that 12 yield that we're getting.
Wow, that is so fascinating. So, in these situations, when you're taking over, what's the minimum investment that someone would need to get started in this?
There's kind of two ways to approach it. You can approach note investing as an active investor where you're going to be doing it yourself. And you're going to be talking to people living in the house, the borrowers. You're going to be managing all of that yourself, or you can be a passive investor. Active, of course, you're going to get a higher rate of return and you're going to be looking at 10 to 12, maybe as high as 14, 15 if you know what you're doing and you're doing it right. As an active investor, it's going to be a lower rate of return, usually somewhere between 6 and 8%. That's all the background to say. So if you're investing passively, for my fund, it's a minimum of $50,000. If you're going active, if you're going to buy one note, you could probably get one for around 50,000. It kind of depends on what's available and what you're looking for. But it can go, the least I've ever spent on a loan was $500. The most I've ever spent on a loan was a few $100,000. So there's a huge range and it really kind of depends on what you're looking for.
Wow, that is super fascinating. For people who are interested in getting started, where can they connect with you, find out more about you online, and eventually start this process?
Yeah, definitely. So if you're looking to get started, again, if you're looking to be an active investor, make sure you learn the rules. And I don't teach, that's not a pitch for me teaching you how to do this, but just to say it's not real estate. This is a different kind of investment and you have to understand you're doing a finance game, not a real estate game. And so make sure you understand the rules. That being said, please feel free to reach out if it's something you're interested in looking at doing yourself. I can point you in the right direction. I would love to talk to you and have a conversation and help get you on track. If you're looking at doing this passively where it sounds great, but I just don't have the bandwidth, that's what I'm here for. So in that case, my website is the best place to go in either way. It's earnestinvesting.com. And there's a place there. I've got a few videos where I explain a little bit more about note investing. I've got a link to a conference that we run every year. If you're more on the active side, you can go there and go and network and learn with other people. And on the passive side, there's places where you can go to make an appointment with me and we can chat and see what comes next.
Excellent. And we'll also have links available down in the description and the show notes so you can get connected with Nathan here. And you also host a podcast which dives a bit deeper into this topic. Is this more of you welcome some guests on, or you mostly host yourself to kind of address the most common questions or topics or stories that come up?
So it's me and a colleague. He actually started it a little over, goodness, we're coming up close to 4 years now. But he started it first and then invited me to come along just as the second person to kind of chat with. We changed the name here just this year. Real Estate Notes is the name of the show. And we most often will bring on a guest that knows something about the note investing, some facet of the business that maybe we're not well versed in. And both of us have been doing this for, 15 years for me, I think 14 years for him. So it's not like we're brand new, but there's always something more to learn. And so we're bringing on guests all the time that help us to learn something new that we didn't know before. And it's been a lot of fun.
That's great. And it seems like you understand the value of being a lifelong learner, even 14, 15 years of experience, still adapting and changing, pivoting as things come up. And there's always more to learn.
Yeah. And somebody's got something that you haven't thought of before. And you think, oh, that's a great idea. That's cool. We should look at that.
For me personally, I never really understood the interest rates. When you say something like a 10% return, is this 10% of the total? Like, let's say it is the 50,000. Are you expecting a 10% return, meaning what is that, 5,000? Or is this more like over 30 years, you're gaining 10% per day, per year? How does that work?
That's a great question because that's an important distinction to make. So the rate of return is, let's say I put up $50,000 and then in an ideal situation in 1 year, or it doesn't really matter how long, but on that project, what is your return versus what you put out? That's your rate of return. What in notes, what we're usually talking about is yield, which is much more like IRR. So your internal rate of return. So it makes it like an annual rate of return over time. So when we're talking about 10%, that's over the life of the loan, whether that's a 20-year loan, 30-year loan, whatever. So 10% per year over the life of the loan. So it's a different calculation and it has to be looked at a little bit differently. So like when I say I'm buying notes for the fund at a 12% yield, but I'm paying my investors an 8% rate of return, they're two different calculations. So it makes it sound like I'm making 4%. I'm actually not. It's much closer to about 2%.
Very fascinating. So now, when it comes to this investing, is it the 50,000, for example, is it cold hard cash? Can we take out a 0% interest credit card for 50K and then make a return? Or is that not financially sound and not legal? How do we can we put assets or collateral into this?
It's cash. So whether you've got cash on hand or whether that comes from an IRA or an old 401k, and I've been surprised to learn how many people are not aware that you can do a self-directed IRA. So you don't have to just go with whatever Fidelity is offering you. You can go into a self-directed IRA and you can invest in almost anything. There are very few exceptions on what you cannot invest in. And it's a fantastic way to build your retirement account. I'm a huge fan of that. And I can point in some good resources to get you on track there.
It sounds super cool. And the rate of return sounds a lot more attractive than the few pennies that you would get from any other, I guess, investment vehicle. They're all different. They all have their own risks, advantages to them. But this, you found your bread and butter, what you really like. Like you said, less headaches. They're still into it. What are some of the obstacles that you've overcome through your experience here, either in the last 5 years, or is this kind of like over time, just some of those obstacles that you ran into?
I think probably the very first obstacle is just understanding how the game works. Cause like I say, it's not real estate and you got to get your head around that. I came from a real estate background. Most people that get into this come from a real estate background, which is great, but it's not the same thing. And so just making sure that you can wrap your mind around it and just the concept of it. And for me, I kind of had to keep going back and be like, think like a bank and kind of coach myself to do that so that I would get out of the real estate mindset and into the finance. So that's been at the beginning, especially, that was the biggest challenge. And then after that, it's just managing everything. It often will come across as like, oh, rainbows and roses. Look, there's work involved. It's not just a set it and forget it unless you're investing passively. But if you're doing this actively, there's work involved. So just be aware. That's all.
Absolutely. I always tell people business is not a rotisserie chicken. You can't set it and forget it. There's always going to be some form of work, some worry, some stress, a lot of
Yeah.
win successes, the balance in between. I always tell people the one successful project you see from an entrepreneur, you don't hear about the 9 other failures typically
Right.
that took to get them there. And it's
Yeah.
kind of level up game. We
Yeah.
constantly pivot, find new opportunities, kind of change directions as we learn more. And that's just a part of being adaptive to whatever surroundings you're kind of put into.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're trying to do with putting the fund together is take away all the learning and all the time and all the energy and money that goes into the learning process. You can learn about it and understand it well enough to be like, yes, this makes sense. I get it. I don't have time. Here's the money. Okay, go. And then I love doing what I do. And so I'm more than happy to take your money and then give you a really great return and still get paid myself.
I love that. That sounds great. Are there opportunities for using a similar system for other assets? Or is real estate just more the loan? Is that just
Yeah.
the most attractive opportunity that you've noticed?
I really like the loans. I like specifically, even you can dive down and get deeper and deeper, but I like loans that are first position against the property. So it could be a note and mortgage. It could be a deed of trust. Essentially, it's the same thing. There's some nuances there, but it's essentially the same thing depending on the state. There's contracts for deed, which is another type of contract, different kind of loan. But all of them, the thing they all have in common is their first lien. So in the case of non-payment, in the case of there's a problem, I'm the first one in line to get paid. And that's the position I like to be in. You can be second, you can be third, you can buy these lines of credit. You can buy credit card debt if you want. Like there are all kinds of different ways to get into this, but that's been my preference is just getting in that most secure position.
It's a smart strategy. Again, it's the risk versus reward challenge that we're kind of presented. You're
Right.
like, let's stay in the comfort zone. You've seen what works,
Yeah.
and this is what you stick with, and it's something that works for you, which is brilliant. Are there any either books, podcasts, YouTube videos, any resources available online that you would recommend to other entrepreneurs? Maybe not even necessarily for your industry, just good business books, entrepreneur ideas that you've kind of come across.
Well, I'll tell you, there's not a lot of books about note investing. There are some, and they're really good. I think I know pretty much all the authors. They're all really great. Kind of the granddaddy, the one that I never met, his name is Jimmy Napier, and the book is called Invest in Debt. And I think it was issued in like 1975 or something like that. Like it's old, but a great book. And it's kind of considered to be kind of the granddaddy of note investing and just kind of the whole introduction. It was a little bit difficult for me to get my hands on a copy, but I did, and I'm glad that I've got it. Other than that, There are some books, there's some podcasts. You can come check ours out, the Real Estate Note Show. But other than that, it's really all about relationships. And so that's a huge part. So I had the opportunity a couple of years ago. I've been going to conferences, different note conferences since 2009. And then 2 years ago, I was approached by the host of one of those conferences to see if I wanted to take it over. And I was absolutely, are you kidding? So besides what I do with the fund, kind of my other more or less side project is running this conference called Diversified Mortgage Expo. It's all about education. It's all about just networking together. There's no pitching at the conference. It's purely just about education and networking. And so that's a fantastic resource is go to some of these conferences. It makes a huge difference.
I love that. There's one thing to be said about the resources like the books and everything. Nothing wrong with books dated from the 70s. I mean, Dale
Yeah.
Carnegie,
Yeah.
a lot of these
Yeah.
stand the test of time. So nothing wrong with those resources, but it is good to network in person, these conferences that you talk about. One for
Yeah.
the education piece, but the people that you're going to meet and talk
Yeah.
to further
Huge.
your education. And this just builds the community, helps bring each other up, the knowledge, the
Yeah.
tips. It's something great to see. Where did this idea, the loan, purchasing of a loan, where did that first originate or start getting popular?
Where did it originate is a great question. I went looking for that at one point. I remember my wife and I were sat down and we were watching a movie and it was set in the 1800s in England. And they talked about somebody bought somebody else's debt. I'm like, that's what I do. And it's been around at least that long. So then that kind of led me on a journey and I kept on looking. There are verses in the Bible that talk about buying other people's debt and taking on someone else's debt. So it's literally been around forever. But I think it kind of gained in popularity quite a bit after the crash, talking like 2009 through 2011, 12. A lot of people out there that were talking about buying up distressed debt. And I did a lot of that over the years. And it's a great strategy. It's one that doesn't quite work as well right now, just because the economy has recovered well enough that it makes it more difficult to do, which is kind of the good news. And there's a segment of people that are kind of rooting for another crash and just for the opportunity that comes from that. And we'll see if that goes.
I know, right? It's like, I don't want the economy to do bad. I don't want people to suffer. But also, it would
Right.
be nice if these products, services, and homes became more affordable again. That would be great.
That's
But
the
there's
thing.
just
And
this,
we're absolutely part of the solution in that case. And so opportunity and we do better with those distressed. We, as a group of note investors, we do much better with those distressed debt notes versus the banks. We're way better at getting people back on track. And so it presents a huge opportunity and a ton of different ways to help people, which is fantastic. Kind of rooting for another crash. We'll see what happens.
now, speaking of the crash in 2008 and maybe even what we experienced 2019 to 2020,
Yeah.
what are there any like red flags or indicators that some people saw 2009 crash coming? Have you noticed any red flags or anything that kind of sticks out or something that's just off about anything?
It's really interesting as time kind of was marching on after the crash. Typically, the market is roughly around a 9-10 year cycle. And so, right around 2019, there's a group of us who are going, well, something's got to give. It feels like it's going to change at some point. 2020 hit and COVID came in, and we're like, well, that's it. This is it. Here we go again. And then it didn't happen. And the main reason I think it didn't happen is because government kicked in a ton of money into the economy to help bolster things up, which I think was probably the right call. But it artificially propped up the industry and like the whole housing market. And so I don't think that we have seen that correction that should have happened or right around 2019, 20. And so we'll kind of feel like that's still coming. And I don't think we're going to see another 2008, but we are starting to see some cracks where defaults are starting to rise and bankruptcies are starting to rise and foreclosure starts are starting to rise. So we're starting to see some of those trends coming around again. And who knows, we'll see how it all shakes out here in the next 12, 24 months.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, Nathan. I feel like we're on the similar wavelength with just kind of how we notice things that happen. People are like, why is inflation so high? And they blame this and they blame
Yeah.
that. And they're like, have you seen the printing of the money supply? That is the root cause of this and why
Yeah.
everything is so much more expensive. When you try to prop up these industries, it's like, what's worth saving? Too big to fail, lack
Yeah.
of competition. Nowadays, businesses are removing features and services and jacking up the prices.
Yeah.
That wasn't affecting your bottom line before, but now you're charging extra for this. So it'll be, he said, the defaults, the layoffs. are kind of concocting this new brew, and we're going to
Yeah.
see if things are going to go down further, up. It'll be interesting.
It will be interesting. And the good news is with the note industry, we're ready for it. Whether the economy is doing well or not, there's still a really good play in this note investing world. So come what may and love it, and we'll see what happens.
It's beautiful. What would the rate of return look like for someone if instead of receiving their benefits or their payout that year, if they continue to put and reinvest that money back into, so that 50,000 maybe became the 55 to 60,000 or whatever that might look like?
Yeah. Didn't Einstein call it the eighth wonder of the world is compounding interest? And that's exactly it. So with our fund, we offer a quarterly distribution. And absolutely, if you want to take the money out, great. Or you can reinvest it and watch it just build and build and build. And you look at the chart, it's slow at the beginning and then it just kind of rockets up. That is something you can do. And especially if it's sitting in a retirement account and you've got 10, 20 years before you need to take it out, wow, you can really make a difference.
That's what I say. If the money's just sitting there, what good does it do? And I think for us business owners, entrepreneurs, we kind of decide, okay, the money that's sitting there, is that a safety net? Should I reinvest into myself and my business, maybe a new opportunity? Where am I going to see the best return with the
Right.
least amount of risk? And I think a lot of entrepreneurs want that safety.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you open it up, like you say, investing back into yourself and your business, that's one thing. If you're using your IRA, oh my goodness, you can't take it out until you're 65 anyway. So if 45 today and you put in $50,000 and then just have that compound, makes a huge difference. It goes up exponentially.
I love it. Nathan, such a fascinating topic and investment vehicle opportunity that many investors, business owners, entrepreneurs would be excited to hear about if
Yeah,
they knew it existed. If they could put their money to work like this, what that would do for their business and their life.
absolutely. And that's what we're here for. So please feel free to reach out. Love to talk to anybody.
I love it. Nathan, we appreciate you coming on to educate me and our audience on this topic. We always love making more money. Who doesn't? This is what life is about. Well, but I appreciate you coming on and sharing all this advice with us. Congratulations on your past success. And we're excited to just stay in touch and kind of see where the note world takes you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.